The One Book, a unified guide to mastery, mission, and massive action, previously in this audiobook. We've been exploring a deceptively simple question. Why do some people achieve extraordinary things while others, equally talented, equally driven, crash and burn? The answer keeps circling back to the same culprit. That voice inside your head that whispers you're special. That urge to protect your image instead of doing the work. That tendency to coast once you've tasted success. We've called it ego, and we've watched it destroy empires, careers, and lives. But here's what we haven't fully explored yet. What lives on the other side of ego? What emerges when you finally get out of your own way? Because once you stop being the problem, you can finally become the solution. And becoming the solution, that's where things get interesting. Let me tell you a story. In 1947, a printing salesman and flower broker named Paul Richard bought a small, failing company at auction for $750 plus $400 in debt. The company was called Fern Sawyer Foods, and it had exactly one employee. Paul kept his day job. He worked Saturdays and evenings trying to make this little business work. For years, Fern sold only 4 products. In 1950, total sales were $6,200. That's not 62,000. 6,200. Paul had 3 sons, Elwood, Lou, and Bill. On Saturdays, the boys would package flour products, learning the business from the bottom up. They'd have what Elwood later called soy ball fights, something not exactly advertised to customers. When Paul died suddenly of a heart attack in 1960, the 3 sons inherited a business none of them really wanted. Elwood was 29, had 2 young children, a wife with severe allergies, and plans to return to graduate school. Lou was a rocket scientist working on fuel for the first manned flight to the moon. Bill was earning his MBA from MIT. None of them wanted the family business, but they took it anyway. Fast forward 60 years. That tiny company, now called Now Foods, employs over 1,400 people, generates more than $800 million in annual sales, and has beaten every odds stacked against family businesses. Over 80% of corporations are family-owned or controlled, but only 30% survive to the 2nd generation. At best, 10% make it to the 3rd generation while remaining private. Now Foods is now in its 4th generation, still privately owned, still thriving. How? What did the Richard family figure out that so many others miss? Here's the strange thing. Their story is, fundamentally, the same story as every other success we've explored. It's the story of the inner king learning to rule wisely. It's the story of a warrior fighting the right battles. It's the story of a magician mastering hidden knowledge. And yes, it's the story of ego, constantly present, constantly managed, constantly put in its proper place. But to understand any of this, we need to dig deeper into something most success books never touch. We need to explore what's actually inside you. Not your resume, not your bank account, not your network. I'm talking about the deep structures of your psyche, the archetypal patterns that have been shaping human behavior since before we built cities. So let's go there. Let's decode what makes you tick, what makes you sabotage yourself, and what, when properly accessed, can make you unstoppable. Part 1. The Architecture of Your Soul. Chapter 1. The blueprints within you were born with a psychological inheritance, not from your parents, deeper than that. From your species, from millions of years of human evolution. Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, called these inherited patterns archetypes. Think of them as the hard wiring of your psyche. They're the reason why myths from completely separate cultures, people who never had contact with each other, tell strikingly similar stories. They're why certain symbols and images appear in dreams across every continent and every era. Here's what this means for you practically. Inside every man and woman, but we're focusing on the masculine here, there exist 4 fundamental energy patterns. 4 potential versions of yourself, each with its own strengths, each with its own shadow side. These aren't metaphors, they're psychological realities that shape how you think, feel, and act every single day. The 4 are the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. The king is the energy of order, blessing, and generativity. When you're accessing the king properly, you're calm, centered, and able to see others clearly. You're not threatened by other people's success because you're secure in your own worth. You bless others, you see them, affirm them, and help them grow. The king creates order out of chaos. He establishes the center around which everything else organizes. The warrior is the energy of action, discipline, and boundaries. The warrior knows what he wants and goes after it with clarity and precision. He's not aggressive for the sake of aggression, he's strategic. He conserves energy. He strikes only when necessary, but when he strikes, he commits fully. The warrior trains, he prepares. He lives with awareness of his own mortality, which gives his actions urgency and meaning. The magician is the energy of knowledge, technology, and transformation. The magician understands the hidden dynamics of things. He's the part of you that can step back, observe, and figure out what's really going on. Shamans, scientists, doctors, lawyers, technicians, anyone who accesses specialized knowledge and uses it to help others, are drawing on magician energy. The magician initiates. He guides others through transformations he's already undergone himself. The lover is the energy of connection, passion, and vitality. The lover feels deeply. He's sensitive to the world around him, attuned to beauty, drawn to intimate connection. Without the lover, the other archetypes become cold, mechanical, detached. The lover brings warmth, joy, and meaning. He's why you care about anything at all. Now here's the crucial part. Every single one of these archetypes has what we call a shadow form. A dysfunctional, bipolar version that takes over when you're not accessing the archetype properly. The shadow king splits into the tyrant and the weakling. The shadow warrior becomes the sadist or the masochist. The shadow magician turns into the detached manipulator or the denying innocent one. And the shadow lover appears as either the addicted lover, lost in sensation, unable to maintain boundaries, or the impotent lover, depressed, disconnected, feeling nothing. Think of it like this. Each archetype is a triangle. At the top is the archetype in its fullness, integrated, mature, generative. At the bottom corners are the two dysfunctional poles. Your job, the work of a lifetime, is to integrate those poles, to resolve the split, and to access the mature energy at the top. Most people never do this work. They oscillate between the poles, never finding the center. They're either tyrannical or weak, either sadistic or masochistic, either manipulative or naive, either addicted or numb. They don't even know these patterns exist, so they can't change them. But you're different. You're here. You're reading this. And that means you're ready to do the work. Key takeaway. You contain 4 fundamental energies: king, warrior, magician, and lover, each with a mature integrated form and a bipolar shadow form. Your psychological maturity depends on accessing the integrated forms rather than oscillating between the dysfunctional poles. Reflection prompt. Which of these 4 archetypes feels most familiar to you right now? Which feels least accessible? Don't judge, just notice. Chapter 2. The Shadow King. Let's start with the most important archetype, because the king underlies and includes all the others. The king is the central organizing principle of the psyche. When the king is on his throne, everything else falls into place. When the throne is empty or occupied by a usurper, chaos reigns. The mature king embodies 2 primary functions: ordering and providing fertility and blessing. First, ordering. The king creates order out of chaos. He establishes the center, defines the boundaries, and organizes the realm. In ancient mythologies, this was represented by the primeval hill, the first land to rise from the chaotic waters of creation. The king sits on that hill. From there, creation radiates outward in every direction. Psychologically, this means the king energy gives you stability, centeredness, and calm. When you're accessing the king properly, you're not easily thrown off balance. Hostile people can't get to you. Sarcasm, accusation, confrontation, they don't shake you. You're rooted, you're present, you can see clearly. The second function is fertility and blessing. The king doesn't just create order, he helps things grow. He sees the potential in others and nurtures it. He blesses. And blessing in this context isn't just a nice sentiment, it's a concrete psychological act. When someone truly sees you, recognizes your worth, affirms your capabilities, values your contributions, something changes inside you. Studies even show that our body chemistry shifts when we feel genuinely valued and praised. The king provides this blessing to everyone in his realm. But here's where it gets complicated. The king also has a shadow, and the shadow king manifests in 2 ways: the tyrant and the weakling. The tyrant is the king energy inflated. It's what happens when a man identifies completely with the king archetype without maintaining proper distance. The tyrant believes he is the center of the universe. He doesn't serve his realm, he exploits it. He doesn't bless others, he demands their adoration. He's paranoid, defensive, and cruel. He fears new life because new life threatens his grip on power. Remember King Herod slaughtering the infants when he heard a new king had been born? That's the tyrant in action. The weakling is the opposite pole. He abdicates the throne. He projects the king energy onto someone else and makes himself dependent on that person. He's passive, listless, unable to take initiative. He complains constantly but never acts. He feels powerless and resentful. And underneath his apparent weakness lurks a hidden grandiosity that can explode into tyrannical rage when pushed too far. Here's the terrifying truth. The tyrant and the weakling need each other. Every tyrant has a weakling underneath. Every weakling has a tyrant waiting to emerge. A man possessed by the Shadow King oscillates between these poles, never finding the center. Think about your own life. Who are the tyrants you've encountered? Bosses who belittled you, parents who controlled you, political leaders who abused their power? Now ask yourself, in what ways did you abdicate your own power to them? Because here's the uncomfortable reality. Tyrants can only exist where weaklings have handed over their authority. This doesn't mean you're to blame for being abused. It means that reclaiming your own king energy is the only way to free yourself from tyrants. As long as you project the king onto someone else, waiting for them to save you, validate you, or give you permission, you'll be vulnerable to manipulation and control. The mature king, by contrast, has a proper relationship to his own power. He doesn't identify with it, that would make him a tyrant, and he doesn't reject it, that would make him a weakling. He stewards it. He serves something larger than himself, a cause, a community, a transpersonal purpose, and uses his power on behalf of that purpose. Key takeaway. The king is the central organizing energy of the masculine psyche. Accessed properly, it provides order, calm, and generative blessing. Accessed improperly, it manifests as the tyrant who exploits power or the weakling who abdicates it. Maturity means stewarding power rather than identifying with or rejecting it. Reflection prompt. Where in your life are you acting like a tyrant? Where are you acting like a weakling? Where are you abdicating power that's rightfully yours? Chapter 3. The Warrior's Way. If the king is the one who decides what must be done, the warrior is the one who actually does it. The warrior is the energy of action, disciplined, focused, strategic action, not chaotic aggression, not mindless violence, trained, precise, effective action. The mature warrior has several defining characteristics. First, clarity of thinking. The warrior sees the battlefield clearly. He's not clouded by emotion, wishful thinking, or denial. He accurately assesses his own strengths and weaknesses, as well as those of his opponent. He knows what he can do and what he can't. This is a crucial distinction from the immature hero energy of boyhood, which tends to be grandiose and unrealistic about its capabilities. Think of a skilled fencer. Before she ever lunges, she's watching. She's reading her opponent's stance, looking for patterns, identifying openings. She's not rushing in. She's waiting for the right moment. That's warrior clarity. Second, strategic flexibility. The warrior doesn't just have one approach. He adapts to the situation on the ground. If a frontal assault won't work, he tries a flanking maneuver. If that doesn't work, he retreats, regroups, and comes at the problem from a completely different angle. Remember King David, who started as a guerrilla fighter, living off the land, avoiding direct confrontation with Saul's superior forces, waiting for the right moment. That's warrior strategy. Third, discipline and training. The warrior doesn't just show up and hope for the best, he prepares. He trains his body and his mind. Samurai warriors practiced their sword techniques thousands of times until the movements became automatic, unconscious, perfect. They lived as if they were already dead, which freed them from fear and hesitation. Modern warriors train the same way. Whether they're athletes, emergency responders, or executives preparing for high-stakes negotiations. Fourth, transpersonal commitment. The warrior doesn't fight for himself. He fights for something larger, his people, his cause, his mission. This is what separates the warrior from the mercenary. The mercenary fights for pay. The warrior fights for loyalty, duty, honor. When the warrior is properly connected to the king, he's fighting to protect and extend the realm, not to gratify his own ego. But the warrior also has a shadow. The active pole is the sadist, the warrior energy turned cruel. The sadist enjoys inflicting pain. He's the drill sergeant who humiliates recruits not to train them but to break them. He's the boss who fires people not for performance but for the pleasure of wielding power. He's the abuser who takes out his own weakness on those more vulnerable than himself. The passive pole is the masochist. This is the man who can't defend himself, who lets others push him around, who absorbs abuse without standing up. He projects warrior energy onto others and feels powerless in his own life. But underneath the masochist lurks the sadist, waiting to explode. The man who passively accepts abuse for years may suddenly erupt in violence that shocks everyone who thought they knew him. The mature warrior integrates both poles. He can be aggressive when necessary, but his aggression is controlled, strategic, and in service of something larger. He can endure pain and hardship, that's the masochistic pole integrated, but he endures willingly for a purpose, not because he believes he deserves to suffer. There's an essential tension between the warrior and the lover that every man must navigate. The warrior is detached, strategic, emotionally distant. The lover is connected, passionate, emotionally engaged. A man who's all warrior becomes cold, isolated, unable to relate intimately. A man who's all lover becomes boundaryless, overwhelmed by emotion, unable to act decisively. The integration of these opposites is the work of maturity. Key takeaway: the mature warrior combines clarity, strategy, discipline, and transpersonal commitment. His shadow forms are the sadist who enjoys cruelty and the masochist who can't defend himself. Healthy warrior energy requires integration with the other archetypes, especially the lover. Reflection prompt: where in your life are you avoiding necessary conflict? Where are you being unnecessarily aggressive? How might you bring more strategic clarity to your challenges? Chapter 4. The Magician's Knowledge. Every profession has its secrets. The electrician understands currents and circuits in ways the rest of us don't. The surgeon knows the hidden geography of the human body. The lawyer navigates a labyrinth of statutes and precedents invisible to the untrained eye. The entrepreneur spots opportunities in market gaps that others walk right past. This is magician territory. The magician is the archetype of knowledge, not just any knowledge, but specialized, hidden knowledge that requires initiation to access. In tribal societies, the shaman or medicine man underwent years of rigorous training. He learned the medicinal properties of plants, the movements of stars, the secret rituals that connected the human world with the spirit world. He was the keeper of mysteries, the guardian of sacred technologies. In our modern world, the magician energy shows up everywhere. Scientists probing the mysteries of subatomic particles, engineers designing bridges that won't collapse, coders writing algorithms that shape what billions of people see online, therapists guiding patients through the labyrinth of their own unconscious minds. All of these are magician functions. The magician has two primary aspects: knowing and doing. First, he knows. He understands the hidden dynamics of his domain. He sees beneath the surface. He's not fooled by appearances. Second, he acts on that knowledge. He contains and channels power. He uses his understanding to effect transformation. This is where the concept of sacred space becomes crucial. The magician understands that raw power must be contained and channeled properly, or it becomes destructive. Think of a nuclear reactor. The radioactive core could kill everyone nearby if not properly shielded. But properly contained, that same energy provides electricity for millions. The magician understands containment. He knows how to handle dangerous forces without being destroyed by them. The shadow magician appears in two forms. The active pole is the detached manipulator. This is the magician who uses his knowledge not to help others but to control them. He withholds information. He charges exorbitant fees for access to his specialized expertise. He enjoys feeling superior to those who don't know what he knows. The medical specialist who won't explain your condition in terms you can understand. The lawyer who deliberately makes legal processes more complicated than necessary. The academic who uses jargon to exclude rather than illuminate. These are all manipulators. The passive pole is the denying, innocent one. This is the magician who pretends not to have power. He feigns helplessness and naivete while secretly manipulating situations to his advantage. He's just asking questions or just trying to help, while actually undermining others and protecting his own status. He's the passive, aggressive colleague who says, "I'm sure you know best," while sabotaging your project. He's the family member who acts hurt and confused when confronted about his manipulative behavior. The mature magician integrates both poles. He has power, real power, based on genuine knowledge and skill, but he uses it in service of others. He initiates people into knowledge rather than hoarding it. He's a teacher, a guide, a mentor. He helps others undergo the transformations he's experienced himself. Let me give you a powerful example of how the magician energy works in practice. When I was building my first company, I was completely unknown. No one had heard of me or my sales training methodology. I had no money for advertising. So I did something that, looking back, was pure magician strategy. I started cold, visiting companies. I would walk into 40 businesses a day in a city where no one knew me, asking to speak with decision makers. I learned more about taking massive action from those cold visits than from any book or course. But here's what I also learned. Knowledge without action is useless, and action without knowledge is blind. The magician needs the warrior to implement. The warrior needs the magician to strategize. Key takeaway. The magician archetype governs specialized knowledge and the technology of transformation. His shadow forms are the detached manipulator who uses knowledge to control, and the denying innocent one who pretends powerlessness. Mature magician energy serves others through teaching and initiation. Reflection prompt. What specialized knowledge do you possess that others might benefit from? Where might you be withholding that knowledge out of fear or pride? Where might you be pretending not to know things you actually know? Chapter 5, The Lover's Fire. We've talked about order and structure. We've explored action and discipline. We've examined knowledge and transformation. But none of these energies work without one more, the lover. The lover is the energy of connection, passion, vitality, and joy. He's what makes life worth living. Without the lover, the king becomes a cold administrator. The warrior becomes a killing machine. The magician becomes a heartless technician. The lover brings warmth, relatedness, and meaning to everything. The lover is sensuous. He's attuned to the physical world, colors, textures, sounds, smells. He notices beauty. He appreciates art, music, good food, fine craftsmanship. He's not afraid of pleasure. He doesn't see the material world as something to escape, but as something to embrace and celebrate. The lover is connected. He feels his bond with other people, with nature, with the cosmos itself. He has what the mystics describe as an oceanic feeling, a sense of being part of something larger, something that transcends individual identity. This connectedness makes him compassionate. He feels others' pain as his own. He's moved by suffering and inspired by joy. The lover is passionate. He doesn't do things halfway. He throws himself fully into whatever captures his heart, a relationship, a creative project, a cause. He's the opposite of detached. He's engaged, involved, committed. But the lover also has a shadow. The active pole is the addicted lover. This is the man who's lost in sensation, unable to maintain boundaries, driven by insatiable hungers he can never satisfy. Don Juan, moving from woman to woman, never finding what he's looking for because what he's looking for isn't in any woman. The pornography addict, collecting images of body parts, unable to relate to a whole person. The substance abuser, chasing the next high while his life crumbles around him. All of these are forms of the addicted lover. The passive pole is the impotent lover. This is the man who feels nothing. He's depressed, disconnected, unable to experience joy or passion or even pain. Life seems grey and meaningless. He goes through the motions but feels no connection to anything. His sexuality is dormant. His creativity is blocked. He's cut off from the source of vitality. The mature lover integrates both poles. He feels deeply, that's the addictive pole integrated, but he's not controlled by his feelings. He maintains boundaries even while being intimately connected. He experiences pleasure without being enslaved to it. He gives himself fully to love without losing himself. He's the troubadour who sings of the exquisite pain of love, knowing that vulnerability and joy are inseparable. Here's a vital insight. The lover archetype has been systematically persecuted by Western civilization for thousands of years. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, our dominant religious traditions, have all viewed the body, pleasure, and the material world with suspicion. The church closed theatres and brothels. It persecuted psychics and nature worshippers. It taught that the world was evil and that sensuality was a distraction from holiness. But archetypes can't be banished. They go underground and resurface in distorted forms. The lover crept back into Christianity through mysticism, through sentimental hymns about a sweet Jesus, through the erotic undertones of devotional poetry. But because the lover was repressed rather than integrated, Western culture has struggled with a profound split between spirituality and sensuality, between sacred and profane love. A man who's cut off from his lover energy will struggle with intimacy. He'll have difficulty experiencing joy. His work will feel mechanical and meaningless. His relationships will lack warmth and depth. He may overcompensate by becoming a workaholic, possessed by the warrior's shadow, or by chasing endless conquests, possessed by the lover's shadow. Neither path leads to satisfaction. Key takeaway: the lover archetype provides vitality, connection, passion, and joy. His shadow forms are the addicted lover, lost in sensation, and the impotent lover, unable to feel. Repressing the lover, which Western culture has done for centuries, leads to distortion and suffering. Integration requires embracing sensuality and connection while maintaining healthy boundaries. Reflection prompt: where in your life do you feel most alive? Where do you feel most numb? How might you be either addicted to sensation or disconnected from your senses? Chapter 6: The Crisis in Masculine Ritual. Here's a problem most people never think about. You probably never went through a genuine initiation into manhood. In traditional societies, the transition from boy to man wasn't assumed. It was engineered. Boys were taken from their mothers at the appropriate age and put through carefully structured rituals. They were separated from the community, subjected to physical and psychological trials, taught the secret wisdom of men, and then returned to the tribe as transformed beings. They had died as boys and been reborn as men. These rituals served multiple purposes. They broke the boy's identification with the mother and the feminine world of childhood. They introduced him to the masculine archetypes, the warrior, the magician, the king, in their mature forms. They gave him a new identity, new responsibilities, new privileges. They connected him to a lineage of men stretching back to the ancestors. And they worked. Boys who went through genuine initiation emerged as fundamentally different people. They had a sense of their place in the cosmos. They knew what was expected of them. They had experienced something profound and irreversible. We've lost all of that. The Protestant Reformation and the Enlightenment discredited ritual process. We decided that rituals were superstitious, primitive, unnecessary. We replaced sacred transformation with mere ceremonial. Graduation ceremonies, award banquets, retirement parties. These events have none of the power of genuine initiation. They don't transform anyone. What fills the vacuum? Pseudo-initiations, gang initiations, fraternity hazing, boot camp, prison culture. These are attempts to create transformation, but they're skewed, stunted, and often destructive. They initiate boys into a false masculinity, one based on domination, violence, and emotional numbness. They don't produce men. They produce wounded boys who pretend to be men. The result is what we see all around us. Boy psychology masquerading as manhood. The drug dealer, the wife-beater, the chronically crabby boss, the hot-shot junior executive, the unfaithful husband, the company yes-man, the gang member, the father who can never find time for his children's events, the coach who ridicules his star athletes. All of these are boys pretending to be men. They got that way, honestly, because nobody showed them what a mature man is like. The cost of this failure is incalculable. It shows up in divorce rates, in addiction statistics, in workplace dysfunction, in political corruption, in environmental destruction. It shows up in the quiet desperation of men who feel lost, confused, and ashamed of their own masculinity. It shows up in the loneliness of men who can't form intimate relationships. It shows up in the rage of men who feel emasculated and don't know why. But here's the good news. The archetypes are still there. They haven't gone anywhere. The blueprints for mature masculinity are encoded in your psyche, waiting to be accessed. The rituals may be gone, but the inner work is still possible. You can initiate yourself. You can find mentors, create your own trials, do the psychological excavation that traditional cultures did through ritual. This book is part of that work. Understanding the archetypes, really understanding them, not just intellectually but experientially, is a form of initiation. It's a map of the territory you need to traverse. The journey will be difficult. There are no shortcuts, but the destination, mature, generative manhood, is worth every step. Key takeaway. Modern society has lost the ritual processes that transformed boys into men. What remains are pseudo-initiations that produce wounded, immature masculinity. But the archetypal blueprints for mature manhood are still accessible through deliberate inner work. Reflection prompt. What were the initiation experiences in your life? Did they genuinely transform you, or were they merely ceremonial? What would a real initiation into mature masculinity look like for you now? Part 2. The Character Within. Chapter 7. The Sacred King in History. To understand what the king energy really is, we need to look at how it's manifested throughout human history. Because the king isn't just a psychological concept, it's the central organizing principle of civilization itself. In virtually every pre-modern society, the sacred king was understood to be the link between the divine and human worlds. He was the axis mundi, the cosmic axis, around which everything revolved. His health, vitality, and righteousness directly determined the fertility of the land, the success of crops, the outcome of wars, and the well-being of his people. The Egyptian pharaoh was believed to be the living incarnation of Ra, the sun god. He was the giver of life and the father of his people. When he performed the Heb-Sed festival, rituals of physical endurance designed to prove his continued vigor, he was renewing not just himself but the entire cosmos. If the pharaoh was weak or sick or corrupt, the Nile might not flood properly, crops would fail, enemies would invade, order would dissolve into chaos. In Mesopotamia, Hammurabi received his famous code of laws directly from Shamash, the sun god. The king was the servant of the divine, not the divine itself, but he was still the essential mediator. Only he could ascend to the top of the ziggurat to commune with the gods. Only he could represent humanity before the divine throne. In China, the emperor ruled by the mandate of heaven. As long as he lived according to the Tao, the cosmic order, his realm flourished. If he violated the Tao, the mandate would be withdrawn. Rebellion would become legitimate. A new dynasty would rise. The king is dead. Long live the king! Everywhere we look, we find the same pattern. The Aztec king was the chief intermediary between the people and the gods. The Indian Raja was believed to be composed of particles of the gods themselves. The Persian king wore a veil to protect his subjects from the fiery effulgence that emanated from him. The Tibetan king was kept away from the profane world entirely. He was too sacred, too charged with divine power, to be contaminated by ordinary life. What's fascinating about all this is that these ancient peoples weren't just making up stories. They were describing something real, a psychological reality that we've since forgotten how to name. The king energy really does organize the psyche. It really does create order out of chaos. When it's present, things flourish. When it's absent, things fall apart. But here's the problem with projecting the king entirely onto an external figure. It disempowers everyone else. If only the pharaoh carries the king energy, then ordinary men never learn to access it for themselves. They remain psychological children, dependent on the ruler for their sense of order and well-being. And when the ruler fails, as all human rulers eventually do, the entire society collapses. The Hebrew tradition offered a partial solution to this problem. The Hebrew kings were understood to be mortal men, not gods. They were servants of Yahweh, not incarnations of him. When they sinned, and they frequently did, the prophets called them to account. Nathan confronted David. Elijah challenged Ahab. The king was not above the law, he was subject to it, just like everyone else. This was a radical innovation. It separated the mortal king from the king archetype. It allowed for criticism of the ruler without threatening the cosmic order. And it opened the door, eventually, to the idea that every man could access the king within himself. The Greeks took the next step with the invention of democracy. If the archetype could be shared among adult male citizens, then no single king was necessary. The king could be internalized, distributed, embodied collectively. This was a profound psychological breakthrough, even if the Athenians didn't think of it in those terms. Christianity pushed the internalization even further. Jesus proclaimed that the kingdom of God is within you. The early Christian Gnostics taught that every person carried a divine spark, a piece of the true God within themselves. The purpose of spiritual practice was to awaken that inner divinity, not to worship it in an external figure. But then something went wrong. The church, once it gained political power, re-externalized the king. It set up a hierarchy of priests and bishops who mediated between God and the laity. It persecuted the Gnostics and mystics who claimed direct access to the divine. It made the king energy the exclusive property of the institution, to be dispensed in measured doses through sacraments and rituals controlled by the clergy. The Protestant Reformation partially reclaimed the internalization. Luther's doctrine of the priesthood of all believers was a radical democratization of spiritual authority. Every man could read the Bible for himself. Every man could approach God directly. No human intermediary was necessary. But modernity, for all its achievements, nearly killed the king entirely. The Enlightenment's rationalism dismissed the whole idea of sacred reality as superstition. The French Revolution literally beheaded the king. The rise of science seemed to make divine order obsolete. We were left with no king outside ourselves and no awareness of the king within. The result? The vacuum gets filled by inferior substitutes. We project the king onto politicians, celebrities, CEOs and gurus. We make gods out of mortals and then tear them down when they inevitably fail us. We oscillate between tyrant and weakling, never finding the center. We feel lost, anxious and purposeless without knowing why. The postmodern world is beginning to recover what we lost. Depth psychology has rediscovered the archetypes. Comparative mythology has revealed the universal patterns. Neuroscience is mapping the brain structures that correspond to these ancient insights. We're learning that the king is real, not as a literal deity in the sky, but as a psychological potential encoded in every human being. Key takeaway. Throughout history, the king archetype has been projected onto external rulers, creating stable but disempowering social structures. The great spiritual and political innovations of Western civilization, Hebrew prophecy, Greek democracy, Christian mysticism, Protestant individualism, have progressively internalized the king, making it accessible to every person. Modernity nearly destroyed this awareness, but post-modernity is recovering it in new forms. Reflection prompt. Who or what are you projecting your king energy onto right now? What would change if you reclaimed that energy and began to steward it yourself? Chapter 8. Ego at the Gate. Now we need to talk about the most dangerous force in your psyche. Ego. Not ego in the Freudian sense, the mediator between ID and superego. Ego in the colloquial sense, an unhealthy belief in your own importance. Arrogance. Self-centered ambition. The petulant child inside every person who chooses getting his or her way over anything or anyone else. Ego is the reason why accessing the king energy is so difficult and so dangerous. When you start to feel the power of the archetypes flowing through you, ego immediately tries to claim that power as its own. It says, I am special, I am chosen, I am better than others, the rules don't apply to me. And the moment you believe that voice, you've fallen into the tyrant's trap. Let me give you a concrete example from the business world. Howard Hughes inherited his father's tool company at the age of 18. He was a mechanical genius, a brilliant pilot, and a visionary entrepreneur. He had genuine access to magician energy. He could see possibilities that others couldn't. But his ego was enormous and unchecked. He abandoned his father's company almost immediately, using it only to siphon off cash. He lost millions in the stock market. His most famous movie, Hell's Angels, took 3 years to make, lost $1.5 million on a $4 million budget, and nearly bankrupted the tool company. His aviation ventures were disasters. The Spruce Goose, one of the biggest planes ever made, cost $20 million and flew exactly once, for barely a mile, only 70 feet above the water. By the end of his life, Hughes was a naked, unwashed, drug-addicted recluse, sitting in his favorite white chair, dictating irrational memos about Kleenex and food preparation, while simultaneously devising brilliant strategies to outrun his creditors. His biographers described him as if IBM had deliberately established a pair of subsidiaries, one to produce computers and profits, another to manufacture edsels and losses. Ego killed Howard Hughes as surely as any physical disease. And here's the terrifying thing. Hughes's story is not unusual. It's the normal trajectory of ego unchecked. Every successful person faces the same temptations he faced. Every achievement brings the risk of inflation. Every victory contains the seeds of future defeat if you let ego take the wheel. The pioneering CEO Harold Janine, who built ITT into a massive international conglomerate, compared egoism to alcoholism. The egotist does not stumble about, knocking things off his desk. He does not stammer or drool. No, instead he becomes more and more arrogant, and some people, not knowing what is underneath such an attitude, mistake his arrogance for a sense of power and self-confidence. They start to mistake that about themselves too, not realizing the disease they've contracted, or that they're killing themselves with it. Ego is the enemy at every stage of the journey. When you're aspiring to something, ego tells you that you're already there, that you don't need to learn, don't need to work, don't need to pay your dues. When you've achieved success, ego tells you that you're invincible, that the rules don't apply to you anymore, that you can coast on past accomplishments. When you've failed, ego tells you that it's not your fault, that you're a victim, that the world is unfair, that you should give up or lash out. Ego is the voice that separates you from reality. It's a conscious separation from, as one early member of Alcoholics Anonymous defined it. From what? From everything. From other people. From accurate self-assessment. From the ability to learn and grow. From genuine connection. The performance artist Marina Abramovich put it directly. If you start believing in your greatness, it is the death of your creativity. Because creativity requires receptiveness, openness, humility. It requires the ability to see what's actually there rather than what you wish were there. Ego clouds that vision. So how do you manage ego? Not by trying to eliminate it. That's impossible. Ego is part of being human. The goal is to keep it in its proper place. To recognize its voice when it speaks. To laugh at its pretensions. To refuse to let it drive the bus. The Stoic philosophers had a practice for this. They would remind themselves regularly of their own insignificance. Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome, wrote in his private journal, "You can leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." He wasn't being morbid. He was practicing humility. He was keeping his ego in check by remembering that he, like everyone else, was mortal and finite. The great generals who won World War II mostly refused to write memoirs. They understood that the temptation to revise history, to make themselves look better, to claim credit they didn't deserve, that temptation was a form of ego, and they didn't trust themselves to resist it. So they simply didn't play the game. This is the fundamental posture of the mature king. He's secure enough in his own worth that he doesn't need to prove anything. He doesn't need adulation. He doesn't need credit. He's content to serve the realm and let others take the glory. He's the opposite of the tyrant, who demands constant validation and attacks anyone who threatens his fragile self-image. Key takeaway. Ego is the enemy at every stage of the journey, in aspiration, success, and failure. It's the voice that separates you from reality, from others, and from your own potential. Managing ego requires constant vigilance, regular practices of humility, and a secure enough sense of self that you don't need external validation. Reflection prompt. Where in your life is ego currently running the show? What would change if you could see yourself more clearly without the distortions of self-importance or self-pity? Chapter 9. The 4 malefactors of ego. Let me give you a framework for understanding exactly how ego sabotages you. I've identified 4 core symptoms, what I call the 4 malefactors of ego. Every destructive behavior, every self-inflicted wound, every missed opportunity can be traced back to one or more of these. The first malefactor, entitlement. This is the belief that you deserve things you haven't earned, that the world owes you success, recognition, comfort, respect, simply because you exist. Entitlement is the voice that says, "I've worked hard enough, I've paid my dues, I shouldn't have to keep proving myself." It's the attitude of the heir who assumes the family business will run itself, who's never done the grunt work, who doesn't know what it takes to build something from nothing. Howard Hughes was entitled. He assumed that his father's tool company would keep printing money forever while he pursued his various obsessions. He didn't steward the business, he exploited it. And when the money ran out, he had no idea how to generate more, because he'd never learned. The antidote to entitlement is the canvas strategy. This is the practice of making other people look good, of clearing the path for those above you, of being an anti-ambulo, the Roman term for someone who walks ahead of their patron, making way, communicating messages, smoothing the journey. The canvas strategy is counterintuitive because it seems to put you in a subordinate position. But here's what it actually does. It teaches you everything. You learn how decisions are made. You learn what really matters to the people in charge. You build relationships. You become indispensable. And eventually, you create your own path. Not by demanding it, but by earning it. Benjamin Franklin understood this. As a young man, he wrote anonymous letters to his brother's newspaper, sliding them under the print shop door. He received absolutely no credit for these letters, which became enormously popular. But he was learning how public opinion worked. He was developing his voice. He was playing the long game. That's the canvas strategy in action. The second male factor, control. This is the compulsion to manage everything, to have your hand in every decision, to trust no one. Control says, it all must be done my way, even the little things, even the inconsequential things. It's the CEO who can't delegate, the parent who can't let their child make mistakes, the partner who needs to approve every expenditure. Control is exhausting for everyone involved. It burns out the controller, who never sleeps. It demoralizes the controlled, who feel disempowered and resentful. And it's fundamentally delusional, because you can't actually control most things. You can't control the economy. You can't control other people. You can't control the weather or the market or the random events that disrupt even the best laid plans. The Persian Emperor Xerxes is the classic example of control run amok. When a storm destroyed the bridges his engineers had built across the Hellespont, he had the water whipped. He threw chains into the sea and ordered it branded with hot irons. He had his soldiers harangue the waves. You salt and bitter stream, your master lays this punishment upon you for injuring him who never injured you. This is absurd, of course, but it's also a perfect illustration of what happens when ego convinces you that you're in control of everything. You start treating the universe as your servant, and the universe has a way of reminding you otherwise. The antidote to control is trust and delegation. It's building systems and then letting people run them. It's accepting that you can't be everywhere and do everything. Dwight Eisenhower, as president, refused to open sealed envelopes. He had a staff for that. His job was to set priorities, think big picture, and trust the people beneath him to do their jobs. That's stewardship, not control. The third male factor, paranoia. This is the belief that everyone is out to get you, that your colleagues are undermining you, that your competitors are conspiring against you, that your subordinates are disloyal. Paranoia is exhausting because it requires constant vigilance. It destroys relationships because you can never trust anyone fully. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because your suspicious behavior eventually drives people away, confirming your belief that they were never really on your side. John DeLorean is a tragic example of paranoia in action. He was a brilliant automotive engineer who left General Motors to found his own company. But instead of building a functional organization, he created a culture of chaos and suspicion. He couldn't delegate except to lackeys whose blind loyalty he prized over competence. He bent the truth constantly, and this habit spread throughout the company. The DeLorean Motor Company collapsed under the weight of its founder's dysfunction, losing $250 million. And when the company was failing, DeLorean didn't take responsibility. He tried to salvage everything through a $60 million cocaine deal that got him arrested. The antidote to paranoia is radical openness and accountability. It's inviting scrutiny. It's admitting your mistakes before anyone catches them. It's building relationships based on genuine trust rather than manipulation. When you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. The fourth male factor, the need to be right. This is the compulsion to win every argument, to have the last word, to prove that you're smarter than everyone else. It's what makes you argue with your spouse about trivial details. It's what makes you dismiss feedback that could actually help you. It's what makes you defend bad decisions long after it's clear they were mistakes. The need to be right is a form of ego because it prioritizes your image over the truth. You'd rather look smart than be smart. You'd rather win the argument than find the best solution. You'd rather protect your pride than learn something new. The antidote is intellectual humility. It's the willingness to say, I don't know. It's the curiosity to ask, what am I missing? It's the courage to change your mind when the evidence warrants it. Socrates was considered the wisest man in Athens because he knew that he knew nothing. That's not false modesty, it's the foundation of real wisdom. Key takeaway. Ego manifests through 4 primary symptoms. Entitlement, believing you deserve what you haven't earned. Control, trying to manage everything. Paranoia, suspecting everyone is against you. And the need to be right, prioritizing your image over the truth. Each has a specific antidote. The canvas strategy, delegation and trust, radical openness and intellectual humility. Reflection prompt. Which of the 4 male factors is currently most active in your life? What would the appropriate antidote look like in your situation? Chapter 10. The 3 stages. Let me show you how ego attacks at every phase of the journey. Because ego isn't just a problem for the successful. It's a problem for the aspiring. It's a problem for the failing. It's everywhere, all the time, and it adapts its strategy to wherever you are. The first stage is aspiration. You're starting something new. You have a goal, a dream, a vision. You're full of energy and enthusiasm. This is where ego shows up as talk. Endless talking about what you're going to do, how brilliant your ideas are, how this is going to change everything. Talk feels like work, but it isn't. It's a substitute for work. It's a way of getting the validation you crave without actually producing anything. The writer Emily Gould realized this during her 2-year struggle to get a novel published. She was too busy spending a lot of time on the internet. She was tumbling, tweeting, scrolling. It felt like work. It felt like building her brand. But it wasn't writing. The actual novel she was supposed to be working on stalled completely. For a year. The antidote at this stage is silence and action. Stop talking about what you're going to do. Just do it. Then do more. Let your work speak for itself. William Tecumseh Sherman, the great Civil War general, had a rule. Never give reasons for what you think or do until you must. Maybe, after a while, a better reason will pop into your head. Silence protects your energy. It prevents premature validation from sapping your motivation. It keeps you focused on what matters. There's another danger at the aspiration stage. Pride in early accomplishments. You've done a little, and ego wants to celebrate as if you've done a lot. This is what trips up so many promising young people. They get a little taste of success and decide they've arrived. They stop learning. They stop working as hard. They start acting like they've figured it all out. And then reality catches up with them. Benjamin Franklin learned this lesson the hard way. As a young man, full of pride after some minor successes, he was strutting around Boston showing off his new watch and suit. Cotton Mather, one of the town's most respected figures, watched Franklin walk straight into a low-ceiling beam. Stoop, young man, stoop, as you go through this world, and you'll miss many hard thumps. Franklin never forgot that lesson. The second stage is success. You've achieved something. The hard work has paid off. Now ego shows up in a new form, the temptation to coast, to rest on your laurels. To tell yourself a story about how brilliant you are and how inevitable your success was. Bill Walsh, the legendary coach who took the San Francisco 49ers from the worst team in football to a Super Bowl victory in 3 years, refused to indulge in this fantasy. When people asked him whether he had a timetable for winning the Super Bowl, his answer was always no. He knew that when you take over a team that bad, such ambitions would be utterly delusional. His first season, they lost 14 games. He nearly resigned midway through his second year because he wasn't sure he could do it. Instead of focusing on winning, Walsh implemented what he called his standard of performance. This was a set of exacting standards for every detail. Players couldn't sit down on the practice field. Coaches had to wear a tie. Everyone had to give maximum effort. There would be no smoking, no fighting, no profanity. Quarterbacks were told where and how to hold the ball. Linemen were drilled on 30 separate critical drills. Routes were monitored and graded down to the inch. This wasn't about control. It was about instilling excellence. Walsh understood that if the players took care of the details, the score takes care of itself. And he was humble enough to know that when victory would happen was not something he could predict. When his team won the Super Bowl, he didn't take credit for a master plan. He refused to be called a genius. He knew it was the standard of performance, the unglamorous daily discipline that had produced the results. The third stage is failure. Things have gone wrong. Maybe it's your fault, maybe it's not. Either way, ego shows up here in two destructive forms. First, it tells you that you're a failure, that this setback defines you, that you should give up, that you're not cut out for this. Second, it tells you that it's not your fault, that you're a victim, that the world is unfair, that someone else is to blame. Both of these are lies. Failure is an event, not an identity. And even if external factors contributed to your failure, you still have agency in how you respond. You can learn, you can grow, you can come back stronger. Malcolm X provides one of the most powerful examples of transformative failure. He was a criminal, a drug dealer, a pimp, an armed robber. At 21, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was guilty. He deserved to be there. He faced what Robert Greene calls an alive time or dead time scenario. Would he use this time to grow, or would he let it destroy him? He chose a lifetime. He taught himself to read by copying the entire dictionary, word by word, from cover to cover. He read history, sociology, religion, philosophy. He studied Kant and Spinoza. Later, when a reporter asked him about his alma mater, his one-word answer was books. He later said that months passed without his even thinking about being detained against his will. He had never been so truly free in his life. Prison became his college. He transformed confinement into liberation. The framework here is simple: a lifetime or dead time. Every moment of difficulty, every setback, every period of waiting or confinement presents this choice. You can be passive, resentful, stuck. That's dead time. Or you can learn, grow, prepare and transform. That's a lifetime. The choice is always yours. Katharine Graham faced a different kind of failure. She was a wealthy socialite who had never worked a day in her life. Then her husband, who ran the Washington Post, had a severe mental breakdown and killed himself. At 46, with 3 children and no work experience, she found herself in charge of a vast corporation with thousands of employees. She was unprepared, timid and naive. What followed was 2 decades of relentless trials. The Pentagon Papers, Watergate, a vicious pressmen's strike where union members wore shirts that said, "Phil shot the wrong Graham," a hostile takeover threat. The Nixon administration explicitly strategizing about how can we hurt the Post the most. Graham could have sold the paper. She could have retreated. Instead, she grew, she learned, she developed her own compass. She made decisions that terrified her board. She stood up to the most powerful people in the world. And she prevailed. The Post's coverage of Watergate changed American history. The company's stock buybacks, made contrary to all business wisdom, created billions in value. By the time she stepped down, the Post had been one of the best performing stocks of its era. What did Graham need through all this? Not swagger, not bluster. She needed to be strong. She needed confidence and a willingness to endure, a sense of right and wrong, purpose. It wasn't about her ego. It was about preserving her family's legacy, protecting the paper, doing her job. Key takeaway: ego attacks differently at each stage of the journey. In aspiration, it shows up as talk and premature pride. In success, as the temptation to coast. In failure, as either self-defeating shame or victim blaming. The antidotes are silence and action, discipline standards, and the choice to turn dead time into a lifetime. Reflection prompt: where are you right now? Aspiring, succeeding, or failing? How is ego showing up in that stage? What would it look like to apply the appropriate antidote? Part 3, the case study in character. Chapter 11, a kingdom built on powdered soy. Let me tell you a story that illustrates everything we've been discussing. It's not the story of a famous person. You've probably never heard of Elwood Richard, but his life is a masterclass in accessing the king, warrior, magician, and lover, and in managing ego at every stage. The story begins, as I mentioned, with Paul Richard buying Fern Sawyer Foods in 1947. Paul was a printing salesman and flour broker who'd been trained as a pharmacist. He'd been, at various times, a Pinkerton detective, a forest ranger at Yellowstone, a cowpuncher for a railroad, and a porter on a Pacific Ocean liner. He kept Fern as a side business, working Saturdays and evenings. The company sold soy products to health food stores: flour, pancake mixes, soy milk powder. Paul had 3 sons. On Saturdays, they worked at the small plant, packaging flour products, having soy ball fights. In 1949, Elwood graduated high school. By 1948, all 3 brothers were using Fern's high-protein soy powder to improve their running times in cross-country, and it worked. Each of them credited the protein powder for measurable improvements. When Paul died in 1960, Elwood was left holding the bag. He was 29, had 2 young children, a sickly wife, and plans to return to graduate school. He didn't want the business, but he took responsibility anyway. The early years were brutal. Fern had about 6 employees when Paul died. Sales were so small that Elwood had to lay off half the workforce almost immediately. He later called it one of the worst days of his life. The experience was so painful that he made a vow. He would never be responsible for letting that happen again. 5 decades and thousands of employees later, Elwood has never laid off anyone since that day in 1960. That's King energy, taking responsibility, making promises, and keeping them. In 1962, Elwood opened his own health food store, Health House, for 3 reasons. First, to learn the business from the retailer's point of view. Second, to keep an eye on the distributors who were starting to duplicate Fern's products. Third, to make money while helping people become healthier. He kept his ownership secret so he could talk to distributors and manufacturers with their guard down. Pure magician strategy. The store struggled. Some days sales were $15 for the entire day. The term health food nut was coming into vogue, and Elwood was the subject of many friendly jokes. But he persisted. He found a remarkable employee named Florence Shibley, who became the heart of the store. When the store finally turned its first profit after 5 years, Elwood gave raises, and Florence became enraged that her co-worker also got a raise. She walked out. Elwood chased after her and eventually calmed her down by promising to open a second store for her to run. That's the warrior in action. Not aggression, but persistence. Not domination, but problem-solving. Reflection point. Notice how Elwood doesn't fit the stereotype of the aggressive entrepreneur. He's quiet, persistent, humble. He learns by doing. He takes responsibility without complaint. He builds relationships. These are the marks of mature masculine energy operating through the king. Chapter 12. The Birth of Now. In 1968, something happened that changed everything. Elwood was working at his Health House store when a customer became outraged about overpaying for Elam Mills products. The same products were available at the Jewel grocery store 2 blocks away for 2/3 the price. The customer called Elwood a dirty robber and walked out. When a second customer repeated the same complaint, it struck Elwood to his core. He immediately made plans to ensure he would never be in such an embarrassing situation again. He knew raw material costs, blending costs, shipping costs, packaging costs, distributor costs, because he was still running Fern. He knew his plant had excess capacity between jobs, so he decided to package his existing bulk flours with a different name and a different label, selling them directly to his store. By eliminating the distributor markup, salesman commissions, and normal freight costs, he could offer prices that competed with the big grocery chains. The name he chose was NOW, an acronym for natural, organic, and wholesome. The first NOW products were non-fat dry milk powder, soy protein, whole wheat flour, cornmeal, and vitamin E. The labels were ugly, black and white, primitive, cheap, but the products were quality and the prices were unbeatable. This was the magician at work. Elwood understood the hidden dynamics of the industry. He knew where the margins were, where the waste was, where he could create value. He wasn't trying to compete on branding or marketing. He was competing on fundamental economics. And he was using knowledge that others had access to, but weren't applying. For the first several years, NOW grew slowly. The labels were so ugly that one of NOW's best customers, Ina Walker of the Sunflower Seed store in Chicago, actually used this as a selling point. She told customers that with packaging this ugly, the product inside had to be good. She was right. But Elwood wasn't just a magician. He was also a warrior who understood the value of massive action. Long before I wrote about the 10x rule, Elwood was living it. He didn't just open one store, he opened 5 in 4 years. He didn't just sell a few products, he expanded to over 800 different items, 41 different sizes of vitamin E products alone. Powders, herbs, teas, beans, grains, specialty flours, anything a health food store might want, now would supply. Here's the thing about massive action that most people miss. It creates its own problems, and that's a good sign. When you're taking enough action, you'll have inventory problems, you'll have cash flow problems, you'll have personnel problems, you'll have systems that can't keep up with growth. These aren't signs of failure, they're signs that you're moving fast enough to create friction. The only way to avoid problems is to do nothing. And Elwood had problems. In 1975, Now was selling apricot kernel pits, which naturally contain letriol, a controversial substance used in alternative cancer treatment. The FDA visited with an armed US Marshal and seized about 200 pounds of product. When Elwood tried to retrieve his inventory, he was told that the FDA had a case against the apricot pits themselves, not against Now Foods. The actual pits were declared the defendant, and Now wasn't allowed to defend itself. Where was the due process of law? Elwood would still like to know, but he didn't give up. He didn't retreat into victimhood. He kept going. He kept adding wood to the fire. Reflection point: the ugly label story is worth pausing on. In an era when everyone obsesses over branding and image, Now succeeded precisely because it didn't care about either. The focus was on substance, quality products, fair prices, honest dealing. This is the opposite of ego. Ego wants to look good. Character wants to be good. Chapter 13: The Art of Staying Small While Growing Huge. From 1972 to 1976, Now was losing money. The family home in Elmhurst was used as collateral to keep the business running. Elwood went long stretches without receiving any paycheck. His children didn't know how severe things were until one of them, David, went to college and had his tuition check bounce on the first day of class. But here's what's remarkable. During these lean years, Elwood didn't cut corners on quality. He didn't exploit his employees. He didn't compromise his principles. He just kept working. He kept showing up. He kept doing the next right thing. This is the king energy in its most essential form, the willingness to endure hardship for the sake of the realm. The king doesn't abandon his post when things get difficult. He doesn't sacrifice his people to save himself. He stays. He suffers alongside everyone else. He leads by example. In 1974, Al Powers joined Now as an accountant. He had been a manager at Carson Pirie Scott department stores and was looking for a change from big business politics. What he found was a company on the edge of bankruptcy, disorganized stores, dishonest employees, inventory theft, and nearly empty bank accounts. The Berwyn store alone had up to 6 employees fired for stealing in a single year. Al remembers being shocked that Elwood used a slide rule to do all business calculations in 1974 when calculators were already common. But the slide rule served Elwood well. He wasn't interested in impressing anyone with technology. He was interested in getting the right answer. Slowly, steadily, through persistence and integrity, the company stabilized. The retail stores became profitable enough to keep Now afloat. Elwood's strategy had always been to provide such good value that customers couldn't afford to shop elsewhere. He wasn't trying to maximize short-term profits. He was building something that would last. This is a crucial distinction. The tyrant, the Shadow King, extracts value. He takes as much as he can, as fast as he can, without regard for the long-term health of the enterprise. The mature king invests. He builds for the future. He's willing to forgo immediate gratification for sustainable success. In 1985, 25 years after taking over his father's business, Now Foods was doing under $1 million in annual sales. 25 years. That's not the story you hear in entrepreneurship porn. That's not overnight success. That's the slow, patient work of building something real. But here's what happened next. In 1985, a product called Max EPA launched. It was a fish oil supplement, and it became the biggest craze the industry had ever seen. National TV ran health reports about how fish oil could reduce cholesterol and improve heart health. Now was selling 100 soft gels for under $8 retail, while the national brands were charging $20. Suddenly, Elwood's son Dan, who had joined the business after college, found himself with the easiest sale in the world. He could call potential customers and offer this amazing product for practically pennies on the dollar. Now started getting a new wholesale customer every day. By 1986, 30% of Now's entire business was max EPA. But then the craze crashed. A negative report came out, the media turned, and the market evaporated almost overnight. The product that had fueled Now's growth became an inventory problem. This is where most companies would have panicked. But Elwood had been through enough cycles to know that crazes come and go. The fundamentals, quality, value, integrity don't change. He kept the company focused on what mattered, and new products emerged to fill the gap. Tryptophan, oat bran, stevia, melatonin, each had its moment. Each eventually cooled, and Now kept growing. Dan Richard learned a critical lesson during the max EPA years. He noticed that selling a case of max EPA was quick, easy, clean, and profitable, while selling 100-pound bags of bran was bulky, leaky, buggy, and a constant headache. The same amount of sales required vastly different amounts of work. This insight pointed Now toward vitamins and supplements rather than bulk foods, even though the company kept foods in its name. That's the magician observing, analyzing, and adapting strategy. Key takeaway: real success is built slowly through consistent effort over decades. The tyrant extracts value for short-term gain. The king invests for long-term sustainability. Crazes and opportunities will come and go. What matters is the foundation you've built. Reflection prompt: where in your life or work are you extracting rather than investing? Where are you chasing short-term wins at the expense of long-term health? Chapter 14. The 10x Mindset, or Why Average is Death. Let me introduce you to a concept that will either liberate you or terrify you. Probably both. It's what I call the 10x rule, and it's the single most important factor in distinguishing those who create extraordinary success from those who settle for average. The 10x rule says this: whatever you think it will take to achieve your goals, multiply by 10. The effort, the time, the resources, the actions, everything. Because here's what I've learned from 30 years of building businesses and studying success. Every single person wildly underestimates what's required. I started my first business at 29. I assumed it would take 3 months to reach the income level of my previous job. It took almost 3 years. That was 12 times longer than I expected. And I almost quit after 3 months, not because of the money, but because of the resistance and disappointment. I had a list of reasons why my company wasn't going to work. The clientele didn't have the money. The economy sucked. The timing was wrong. I was too young. My clients didn't get it. I never considered that I had merely incorrectly estimated what it would take. Once I stopped calculating all the wrong reasons and committed to increasing my efforts 10 times, everything changed. Instead of making 2 to 3 sales calls a day, I started doing 20 to 30. When I ramped up my commitment and aligned my thoughts and actions at 10x levels, the market started responding. This connects directly to the Now Foods story. Elwood Richard built his business over decades, not years. He was willing to endure losses, setbacks, theft, regulatory harassment, and economic cycles that would have destroyed anyone operating at normal levels of commitment. He wasn't trying to get rich quick. He was building something that would outlast him. And it did. Now let's talk about what most people actually do. I've identified 4 degrees of action. The first is doing nothing. These people have given up. They're not even trying anymore. The second is retreating. These people are actively moving backward, avoiding anything that might lead to failure or rejection. The third is taking normal levels of action. This is the most dangerous group because they appear to be doing the right things. They have jobs, they have plans, they work reasonable hours, but they never do enough to break through to real success. The 4th degree is massive action. This is the 10x level. This is what creates extraordinary results. And here's the surprising thing. Massive action is actually the most natural state. Watch children. They're in constant, relentless action until adults tell them to calm down. Look at nature, ant colonies, beehives, the activity beneath the ocean's surface. The universe operates on massive action. We're the ones who've been trained to hold back. Elwood Richard operated at massive action levels, but not in the flashy, look at me way that characterizes so many entrepreneurs. His massive action was quiet, consistent, persistent. He showed up every day for 50 years. He kept expanding when others contracted. When the FDA raided his warehouse, he kept going. When employees stole from him, he kept going. When the company was losing money and his children's tuition checks were bouncing, he kept going. That's 10x persistence. Key takeaway: success requires massive action, 10 times what you think necessary. Most people operate at the first 3 degrees, doing nothing, retreating, normal action, and wonder why they don't succeed. The 4th degree, massive action, is actually our natural state, which we've been trained out of. Reflection prompt: where in your life are you operating at normal levels of action? What would 10x action look like in that area? What's stopping you from taking it? Chapter 15. The numbers don't lie. Let me give you some sobering statistics. The average worker reads less than 1 book per year and works 37.5 hours per week. This same person makes 319 times less money than the top US CEOs, who claim to read more than 60 books a year. That's not a coincidence. That's cause and effect. The average person spends 22.3% of their available time at work, 33.3% asleep, and 16.6% in front of a TV or online. And those comparisons assume that the person spends 100% of their time at work actually working, which, of course, they don't. Every person has 168 hours in a week. Based on a typical 40-hour work week, the average employee is only productive for 37.5 of those hours, subtracting lunch. That's if they're actually working the whole time. Most aren't. Meanwhile, the most successful people I know have a completely different relationship with time. They're not balancing, they're integrating. They don't think in terms of work-life balance. They think in terms of having it all. They want abundance in every area: financial, relational, physical, spiritual. And they're willing to do what it takes to create that abundance. This is where many people get uncomfortable. They've been taught that wanting too much is greedy, that ambition is somehow unspiritual, that you should be satisfied with what you have. But here's the counterintuitive truth. The people who create the most success are often the most generous. They have more to give. They can fund charities, create jobs, support their communities, leave legacies. The desire for success, properly channeled, is not selfish, it's generative. Elwood Richard understood this. Now Foods donates millions to charity, basic human needs, disaster relief, environmental conservation. The company's success has enabled generosity that wouldn't be possible otherwise. This is the king blessing his realm. He creates abundance so he can share it. But let me be clear about something. Success is not about money. It's about fulfilling your potential. It's about using the gifts you've been given. It's about making the contribution you're capable of making. I consider it unethical not to fully utilize my talents, my energy, and my mind. To leave potential unrealized is a form of theft, from yourself, from your family, from the world. This is what the king energy demands, that you steward your realm, that you build something, that you leave things better than you found them. Whether your realm is a family, a company, a community, or the planet, you have a responsibility to generate, to create, to bless. Key takeaway: the statistics are clear. Massive success requires massive investment in yourself, reading, learning, training, and massive action. The desire for success is not selfish, it's generative. Unrealized potential is a form of theft from the world. Reflection prompt: how much time do you actually spend on activities that move you toward your goals? Be honest. What would change if you reclaimed even half the time you spend on distractions? Chapter 16. Obsession is not a disease. Let me rehabilitate a word for you: obsession. The dictionary defines it as the domination of one's thoughts or feelings by a persistent idea, image, or desire. Society treats this like a pathology. But show me one person who has achieved greatness without being obsessed on some level. You can't. The successful are obsessed with their mission. They think about it constantly. They wake up with it and go to sleep with it. They're not balanced, they're committed. They're not well-rounded, they're pointed. Like a laser, their focus is narrow and intense. That's what cuts through. When was the last time you were truly obsessed with something? When did you last lose yourself in a project, forget to eat, work through the night because you couldn't stop? For most of us, it was childhood. Children are naturally obsessive. They fixate completely on whatever captures their interest. They don't know about balance or moderation. They just go. Then adults come along and tell them to calm down, to be reasonable, to not get so worked up. And we learn to suppress our natural intensity. We learn to be average. But the 10x life requires obsession. It requires that you become fanatical about your goals, until the world understands that you're not going away, that you are 100% committed and have complete conviction. You won't get the attention and support you need. Obsession is like a fire. You have to keep adding wood. Eventually it gets so big and so hot that people feel compelled to sit around it in admiration. Think about what happened when I was building my sales training business. I decided I wanted to be the name synonymous with sales training. Not compete, dominate. I wanted 6 billion people to know who I am. Ridiculous? Absolutely. That's the point. A big enough goal will fuel massive action. A small goal won't get you out of bed. I started writing books, 3 in 18 months. I recorded more than 200 videos. I wrote 150 blog articles. I did 700 radio interviews. I posted on social media 48 times a day, personally, not through some automated service. People started asking, how do you do all this? Do you ever rest? The complaints about too many emails turned into admiration. The same people who wanted me to back off started wanting to learn from me. That's what happens when you burn the place down. When your fire is big enough, the critics either shut up or get incinerated. Key takeaway: obsession is not a disease. It's a requirement for extraordinary achievement. Children are naturally obsessive until adults train them out of it. The 10x life requires reclaiming that natural intensity and directing it toward your mission. Reflection prompt: what would you be obsessed with if you allowed yourself to be? What goal is big enough to justify that level of commitment? Chapter 17. Fear is your compass. Here's a mind-bending idea. Fear is not your enemy. It's your indicator. It's telling you exactly what you need to do. If you're afraid to make a certain call, that's the call you need to make. If you're afraid to have a certain conversation, that's the conversation you need to have. Fear is like a compass pointing toward growth. Why? Because fear shows up at the edge of your comfort zone. It marks the boundary between what you've already mastered and what you haven't yet attempted. The absence of fear means you're staying within familiar territory. You're not growing, you're coasting. The most successful people I know are scared most of the time. They just don't let fear stop them. They've learned that fear is a false event appearing real. Most of what we fear never happens, and even when our fears do materialize, we usually discover we can handle them. Here's the critical insight. Time feeds fear. The longer you wait to do something scary, the scarier it becomes. So the solution is to act immediately. Don't give fear time to grow. When you feel the impulse to act on something important, do it now. Not in 5 minutes. Not after you've prepared. Now, when I decided I wanted a TV show, I had no idea how to get one. I had no connections in television. I'd never been on TV. Every rational assessment said it was impossible. But I committed first and figured it out later. I started calling anyone I knew who might have connections. I hired PR firms. I said yes to every media opportunity, even when the topic was completely unrelated to my expertise. I once did an interview about Levi Johnston and Sarah Palin's relationship, a topic I knew nothing about, just to establish that I was reliable. When I finally got a meeting with a production company in New York, I told them I'd be there that weekend, even though I had no plans to be in New York. Then I made it happen. I rearranged my schedule. I flew out on my own dime. I walked into that meeting with no preparation and no idea what I was doing, and I sold them on my vision, because I was willing to be scared and do it anyway. The warrior knows this. The samurai lived as if they were already dead. When you've already accepted the worst outcome, fear loses its power. What's the worst that can happen? You fail. You look foolish. You lose money. So what? You've survived worse. You'll survive this. Key takeaway: Fear is not a stop sign, it's a green light. It indicates growth opportunities. The antidote to fear is immediate action. Don't give it time to grow. Live as if you're already dead, and fear loses its power. Reflection prompt. What are you currently afraid of? What action would you take if you weren't afraid? What's the worst that could happen, and could you survive it? Chapter 18. Excuses are the enemy. Excuses are the most plentiful commodity on earth. Everyone has an unlimited supply, and because they're so abundant, they're worthless. They've never improved anyone's situation. They've never solved a problem. They've never created a single dollar of value. The most common excuses I hear: I don't have the money. I have kids. I'm too young. I'm too old. The economy is bad. My boss doesn't support me. The competition is giving away their product. People don't return my calls. I'm tired. I need a vacation. I have bad luck. Let me be blunt. Nobody cares. The market doesn't care about your excuses. Your goals don't care about your excuses. The universe doesn't care about your excuses. They're just noise, a way of making yourself feel better about not doing what you know you should do. Here's the shift that changes everything. Nothing happens to you. Everything happens because of you. This sounds harsh. It sounds unfair. Sometimes it is unfair, but it's the only posture that gives you power. If things happen to you, you're a victim. If things happen because of you, you're a creator. Victims make excuses. Creators make results. I've been stolen from. I've been betrayed. I've had deals fall apart that were guaranteed. I could make a long list of legitimate grievances. But what good would that do? It wouldn't change anything. The only productive response is to ask, what could I have done differently? How can I prevent this in the future? What do I do now? The story of Now Foods is filled with opportunities for excuses. The FDA seizure, the employee theft, the dishonest competitor who spread false lab results, the Chinese customer who pirated their brand, the UPS strike, the Oracle system that nearly shut down the company. Each of these could have been a reason to quit. But Elwood Richard didn't quit. He didn't make excuses. He just kept going. That's the warrior integrated with the king. The warrior perseveres. The king maintains perspective. Together, they're unstoppable. Key takeaway. Excuses are plentiful and worthless. The posture of nothing happens to me, everything happens because of me, is the only one that gives you power to change your circumstances. Reflection prompt. What excuses have you been using lately? How would your situation change if you took full responsibility for it? Chapter 19. The generosity of the generative. Let's talk about what success is actually for. Because if you build a kingdom just to sit in the castle and count your gold, you've missed the point entirely. You've become the tyrant. The mature king is generative. He creates for the sake of others, his family, his employees, his community, the world. He builds systems that will outlast him. He mentors successors. He leaves a legacy. Erik Erikson, the great developmental psychologist, coined the term generative man to describe this stage of mature adulthood. Generative man has achieved a secure identity and now turns his energy outward. He cares for the next generation. He contributes to society. He finds meaning not in what he accumulates, but in what he gives. This is not weakness. It's not self-sacrifice in the masochistic sense. Generative man gives from abundance, not depletion. He's filled up enough that he overflows. He blesses because he's been blessed. He teaches because he's learned. Look at the charitable giving of Now Foods. The company donates millions annually to autism research, to children's homes, to disaster relief, to environmental causes, to food pantries, to international aid. This isn't public relations. It's an expression of who they are. The Richard family believes that success carries with it a responsibility to give back. This is what the inner king demands, that you use your power to bless. Not to dominate, not to control, to bless. To see the potential in others and nurture it. To create opportunities, to build things that will last beyond your lifetime. The ultimate purpose of accessing the archetypes is not personal power, it's generativity. It's becoming the kind of person who makes the world better simply by being in it. The king who dances the four quarters keeps the world created. He doesn't just occupy a throne, he actively, joyfully, continuously regenerates his realm. Key takeaway. The mature king is generative. He creates for the sake of others. Success is not about accumulation, but contribution. The ultimate goal of psychological maturity is to become someone who blesses the world. Reflection prompt. What would it look like for you to be more generative? How could you use your skills, resources, and influence to bless others? Part 4. Putting it all together. Chapter 20. The 10x Life in Practice. So how do we weave all of this together? How do we access the king, warrior, magician, and lover while practicing the 10x rule and keeping ego in check? Let me give you a practical framework. First, set 10x goals. Whatever you think you want, multiply by 10. Don't just want to make $100,000, want to make $1 million. Don't just want to lose 10 pounds, want to transform your entire body. Don't just want a better marriage, want the kind of marriage that inspires everyone who sees it. Big goals fuel big actions. Small goals produce small results. Second, write your goals every day. I keep a legal pad next to my bed. Every morning I write my goals as though I've already achieved them. I own 5,000 apartments. I am in perfect health. My net worth is over 100 million. My marriage is a positive model for others. This isn't delusion. It's programming. It's keeping your attention on the destination rather than the difficulties of the journey. Third, take massive action immediately. Don't wait until you're ready. Don't wait until you have all the information. Commit first, figure it out later. The moment you feel fear, that's your signal to move. Don't feed fear with time. Starve it with action. Fourth, expect criticism and use it as fuel. When you start operating at 10x levels, people will notice. Some will admire you, some will want to learn from you, most will envy you and try to tear you down. This is normal. It's a sign you're on the right track. The only way to avoid criticism is to do nothing worth criticizing. Fifth, never contract, always expand. When the economy is bad, when others are retreating, when fear is everywhere, that's your opportunity. I spent more money on promotion during the recent recession than I had in the previous 18 years combined. I increased every form of outreach while my competitors were cutting back. Expansion is a discipline. You have to practice it until it becomes your default response to challenge. Sixth, serve something larger than yourself. The tyrant serves himself. The king serves the realm. Make sure your ambition is connected to a purpose that transcends your personal comfort and status. This is what keeps ego in check. When you're genuinely trying to help people, you're less likely to get inflated by success or destroyed by failure. Seventh, stay a student forever. No matter how much you achieve, there's always more to learn. The magician is an eternal apprentice. He knows that mastery is a direction, not a destination. Read constantly. Attend seminars. Seek mentors. Ask questions. Be curious. The moment you think you've arrived is the moment you start declining. Eighth, balance the archetypes. Don't be all warrior and no lover. Don't be all magician and no king. Pay attention to which energies are dominant in your life and which are underdeveloped. The goal is integration, not specialization. A man who can access all 4 archetypes as needed is far more powerful than a man who's overdeveloped in one and deficient in the others. Key takeaway. The 10x life requires big goals, daily practice, massive action, expectation of criticism, constant expansion, service to something larger, lifelong learning, and balanced integration of all 4 archetypes. Reflection prompt. Which of these 8 practices is currently strongest in your life? Which needs the most attention? What's one thing you can do today to strengthen your weakest area? Chapter 21, The Invocation. Accessing the archetypes is not just an intellectual exercise, it's an experiential practice. You have to feel the king within you. You have to embody the warrior, channel the magician, embrace the lover. This requires techniques that traditional cultures understood and modernity has forgotten. One of the most powerful techniques is active imagination. This is a form of focused meditation where you deliberately engage with the archetypes through visualization, dialogue, and ritual. Here's how it works. Find a quiet place, sit comfortably, close your eyes. Visualize the archetype you want to access. If it's the king, you might imagine a wise, benevolent ruler on a throne. Feel his calm, feel his centeredness, feel his power that doesn't need to prove itself. Now imagine yourself approaching him. Ask for his blessing, ask for his guidance, ask to share in his qualities. Don't just think about this, feel it. Let the energy of the king fill you. You can do the same with the warrior. Visualize a samurai, a knight, a special forces soldier, whatever image resonates with you. Feel his discipline, his focus, his readiness. Feel the weight of his sword, the alertness of his posture. Ask to share in his courage, his clarity, his willingness to act. For the magician, visualize a wise old man, a scientist in his laboratory, a shaman in his sacred space. Feel the depth of his knowledge, feel his ability to see beneath surfaces. Ask to share in his wisdom, his understanding of hidden dynamics, his capacity to transform. For the lover, visualize a poet, a musician, a dancer, someone fully embodied and passionately engaged with life. Feel the aliveness in your body. Feel your connection to everything around you. Ask to share in this vitality, this joy, this capacity for deep feeling. This practice may feel strange at first. That's fine. Keep doing it. The unconscious responds to images and symbols. When you consistently invoke the archetypes, they begin to manifest more fully in your life. You'll find yourself naturally calmer in situations that used to provoke you. You'll find yourself taking action without hesitation. You'll find yourself understanding things that used to confuse you. You'll find yourself feeling more alive, more connected, more passionate. This is not magic. It's psychology. It's working with the deep structures of your psyche rather than against them. It's aligning your conscious intentions with your unconscious potentials. And it works. Key takeaway. Active imagination is a practical technique for accessing the archetypes. Through visualization, dialogue, and consistent practice, you can strengthen your connection to the king, warrior, magician, and lover energies. Reflection prompt. Which archetype do you most need to access right now? Set aside 10 minutes today to practice active imagination with that archetype. Notice what you feel. Chapter 22, The Dance. There's a beautiful image from the Hebrew Bible. King David dancing before the Ark of the Covenant as it enters Jerusalem. He's not sitting on a throne, stiff and formal. He's dancing, ecstatic, joyful, completely embodied. His wife Michal sees him and is embarrassed by his undignified display. But David doesn't care. He's dancing for God, not for human approval. This is the king integrated with the lover. This is the warrior who has fought his battles and now celebrates. This is the magician who knows that the deepest mysteries can only be expressed in movement, in music, in art. The fully actualized man doesn't just work, he plays. He doesn't just produce, he creates. He doesn't just endure, he enjoys. He has learned to dance the four quarters, to move gracefully between the energies, never stuck in one, never neglecting any. This is what we're aiming for. Not grim, dutiful productivity, not hedonistic self-indulgence, a joyful, generative, integrated life. A life where work feels like play because you're doing what you were made to do. A life where relationships are rich and deep because you've done the inner work to be present and vulnerable. A life where challenges are welcomed because you know they're opportunities for growth. The return of the king is not about some external savior. It's about the awakening of the king within you. And with the king come the warrior, the magician, and the lover. All four, dancing together, each taking the lead when appropriate, each supporting the others. This is possible for you. It doesn't matter where you're starting from. It doesn't matter what failures you've experienced or what wounds you carry. The archetypes are there, encoded in your psyche, waiting to be accessed. The work is difficult but straightforward. Understand the patterns, do the practices, take massive action, manage your ego, serve something larger than yourself, and keep dancing. The king is within you, the warrior is within you, the magician is within you. The lover is within you. They've been there all along, waiting for you to call them forth. So call them, invoke them, embody them, and then go build something beautiful. Key takeaway. The goal is integration, all four archetypes dancing together in a joyful, generative life. This is possible for anyone willing to do the work. The king is within you, waiting to be awakened. Reflection prompt. What would it look like for you to dance the four quarters, to integrate work and play, discipline and joy, knowledge and passion? Where are you out of balance? What would it take to restore harmony? Glossary of key terms. 10x rule, the principle that you should set goals 10 times higher than you initially imagine and take 10 times more action than you think necessary, based on the observation that most people wildly underestimate what's required for success. Active imagination, a technique developed by Carl Jung involving focused meditation and visualization to engage with unconscious contents, including archetypes. Used to access and integrate the deeper structures of the psyche, alive time versus dead time, a framework for responding to adversity. Dead time is passive waiting and resentment. Alive time is active learning, growth and preparation, regardless of circumstances. Archetype, an inherited pattern of thought, feeling and behavior encoded in the collective unconscious. The four foundational masculine archetypes are the king, warrior, magician and lover. Axis Mundi, the cosmic axis or world center, the point where sacred and profane realities intersect. Psychologically, the center that organizes the psyche and provides stability. Blessing, the act of seeing, affirming and valuing another person in a way that contributes to their sense of identity and worth, a primary function of the mature king. Canvas strategy, the practice of helping others succeed as a means of learning, building relationships and eventually creating your own opportunities. The antidote to entitlement. Ego, an unhealthy belief in one's own importance that separates a person from reality, from others, and from their own potential. The primary obstacle to accessing mature archetypal energies. 4 degrees of action, a framework for understanding levels of activity. 1. Doing nothing. 2. Retreating. 3. Taking normal action. Taking massive action. Only the 4th degree produces extraordinary results. Generative man, Erik Erikson's term for the mature adult who has achieved a secure identity and turns his energy outward to contribute to the next generation and society. King archetype, the central organizing energy of the masculine psyche. In its fullness, it provides order, calm, generativity, and blessing. Its shadow forms are the tyrant, active pole, and the weakling, passive pole. Lover archetype, the energy of connection, passion, vitality, and joy. In its fullness, it provides sensuality, relatedness, and meaning. Its shadow forms are the addicted lover, active pole, and the impotent lover, passive pole. Magician archetype, the energy of specialized knowledge and transformation. In its fullness, it provides wisdom, insight, and technical mastery. Its shadow forms are the detached manipulator, active pole, and the denying innocent one, passive pole. Massive action, the 4th degree of action, taking quantities of action far beyond what most people consider reasonable. Characteristic of all highly successful people. Omnipresence, the goal of being everywhere at all times, making your name, brand, or presence so ubiquitous that you dominate the thinking of your market. Shadow, the bipolar dysfunctional form of an archetype. Each archetype has an active pole, characterized by inflation and aggression, and a passive pole, characterized by deflation and withdrawal. Integration of these poles is the goal. Warrior archetype, the energy of action, discipline, and boundary setting. In its fullness, it provides courage, clarity, strategic thinking, and transpersonal commitment. Its shadow forms are the sadist, active pole, and the masochist, passive pole. Final reflection. You've made it through. You've explored the architecture of your soul. You've met the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. You've seen how ego undermines them at every turn. You've learned the 10x rule and the discipline of massive action. You've studied a real-world example of all these principles in action through the story of Now Foods and the Richard family. Now the question is, what will you do with this knowledge? The archetypes are not just interesting ideas. They're potentials waiting to be activated. The 10x rule is not just a motivational slogan. It's a practical methodology for achieving any goal. The management of ego is not just a nice philosophy. It's a daily practice that determines whether you'll build something lasting or crash and burn. You have everything you need. The blueprints are inside you. The tools are in your hands. The only thing missing is your commitment, your decision to do the work, your willingness to be uncomfortable, to face fear, to persist through resistance, to serve something larger than yourself. The king is within you. The warrior is within you. The magician is within you. The lover is within you. They've been waiting for you to call them forth. So call them, now, today, and then go build your kingdom. Not for the glory, not for the ego, for the realm, for the next generation, for the sheer joy of seeing what you're capable of creating when you finally get out of your own way. Go. The throne is yours.